All right, Jason, we are back.
Whoa. Todd, we have these big production agencies that are very similar to like Fox News or that kind of thing. And so when we have something weird happen, like the internet crash at your house, like, hey, we all of a sudden get to get to restart it. So thanks, folks. Sorry about a little technical glitch. Hey, we're gonna have part 1 and 2 this week. How weird is that?
Wow, you're getting big when you have parts 1 and 2. Yeah, so I'll just explain here. We have someone over at the house right now, and they decided to flip a switch. So that happens in a live broadcast sometimes.
Oh, that's spectacular. So bringing you guys up to speed with where we were at from our first segment. Oh God, I can't believe like episode 5, we get our first 2-part segment, Todd. Like this feels incredible. So if you look, so we've established the government starts funding student loans. Student loans are they partner with the banks to make it where you can't forgive the student loans. And now that you've made all these loans, they can legally give out these large loans and nobody can default on them. So you've created an incentive structure that Republicans did for the big banks and the big finance companies to set up these loans. Now what's happening, if you look in the 2000s, all of a sudden there's all this money available. All these kids can go to these schools and all these kids qualify for really, really big student loans. So responding to that incentive, the institutions start increasing their costs, their offerings, paying their infrastructure. And if you look, that bottom blue line is inflation, and then the green line that you see on the screen is the increase in the costs of college.
And Jason, I don't know if you have any anecdotes for this, but I keep hearing about 18-year-olds that are trying to start their own business, 18-year-olds that are trying to buy a house, and good luck finding financing for $400,000. But if you want to go to college for $400,000, sign right here.
Right. It's interesting you say that because, to make an anecdote for that, let's say you wanted to go to school and you got your plumbing certificate. Everybody needs plumbers. I don't know if you've got one lately. Those guys make a ton of money. And if you go to a private borrower and say, hey, I'd like to start my company now. I went to school. I got my education. I want to go contribute. And frankly, like who does more for society than plumbers? Plumbers are pretty key components to the cog spinning. You'll have to say, okay, what's your plan? What's your P&L? What are you going to spend it on? There's going to be all sorts of scrutiny. The bank is going to be hesitant to give you money because you don't have expense. All those checks and balances that frankly are good. If I want to start a business, it shouldn't be just super easy for me to get a loan. But why do we do that when it comes to getting an educational loan? It just shouldn't be that way.
And especially, Jason, when you think about the quality of education. So what really is the purpose of sending all of these young people to college at this point? I graduated, almost 2 decades ago now from college. It was a private college. I guess it was an okay educational experience. I goofed off. Am I any better off for it now? And you could argue, yes, you were exposed to different ideas, different people, but I could also have gotten that in the private workforce as well. I would have been exposed to interesting people as an 18-year-old learning HVAC. I certainly could have read things on my own YouTube. I'm a fan of PragerU's short videos. Like there's a lot of education out there that you don't necessarily have to pay for. Anything I do around the house now is self-taught, basically. I'll just go on Google and YouTube and figure out how I need to rewire some plumbing in my house. So was the price of college worth it for me? For some people, yes. My wife had to go to college to be a doctor. You certainly have to go get an education for some fields. But what's the push for young people nowadays? And I look at college and I look at young people, nieces, nephews, cousins. I don't know if they're getting their value. And then you start to wonder, is there an ulterior motive? And then you and I can start talking about DEI. We can talk about social justice. If you go to college nowadays, you're going to come out a communist. You might go in with certain values, but you're only going to be exposed to one thing for 4 years. And I can't help but think, but sometimes we want to create a generation of people that have been exposed and indoctrinated, and then they don't have to pay for it, right? You and I can pay for their communist education.
Well, and it's interesting you say that. So understand, Republicans laid the trap by trying to profit off this. And how do they profit off this? You make all these lending institutions, the big banks that Republicans have been in their pocket for years. You make these loans available, you make them guaranteed, you make them have really loose regulations for how much they give out. Those politicians are going to get kickbacks in the form of campaign donations. They're going to hire these politicians to give speeches for their annual meetings. When they leave Congress, they're going to all of a sudden turn up as a contractor for these different institutions. And then the left, to their credit, they looked at this and said, hey, we want to take over colleges. We want to make a bunch of communist indoctrination camps. And now we can make this a hugely profitable thing. Because to send people to learn these awful communist ideas, we can charge them a buttload. And Republicans have given the weapon to us where we can increase the cost of how much they're getting paid or how much they're paying to get this indoctrination, that we get to increase it by 500%. Like, what a great scam.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. You talked about politicians getting some kickbacks here. You want to see our guy, Joe Biden? It wouldn't be a show without Joe a couple times.
Wouldn't be a show without Joe Biden.
Boy, lucrative pushbacks indeed. We have more to discuss when we follow up with this video here.
A lot of university campuses. Matter of fact, for 4 years, I was a full professor at the University of Pennsylvania.
Oh, that's not the only time he said that, though.
Pennsylvania for 4 years. I used to teach political theory.
Okay, so there's Joe Biden. He said it a couple times. The first was in 2019. The second one was just this week, actually. He got fact-checked big time for that, by the way. Joe Biden was salaried by Penn, never taught a class, never did anything there. But Jason, he collected a cool $1 million for being on staff at Penn for 4 years.
Well, wasn't it $1 million a year?
It was $900,000 if you want to believe Snopes. But you and I can debate figures, regardless if it's $1 million for 4 years or $1 million every year. For what?
And put this in perspective, Joe Biden leaves the office of vice president, moves into the private sector. You know, vice president doesn't make, I mean, they make good money, but they don't make like ridiculous money. And we've talked about Joe Biden's corruption and his business deals. But legal, on the books, University of Pennsylvania decides to establish the Joe Biden Penn Center. Ironically, that same year, $55 million in Chinese communist donations come into the University of Penn. And this is all publicly available on their websites. Don't trust us. Go to just Google Biden Penn Center, read the press releases. They cover it. They aren't trying to hide it up. And then Joe Biden is hired as a faculty member who never teaches a class to host an office on the University of Pennsylvania for $1 million. So why do you think Joe Biden's going to support legislation that is going to allow the institutions and the financial institutions to continue to drive up these costs?
And as you talk about rising costs in college, colleges have a lot more money they can play with. And guess what? Now they're going to hire the vice president of the United States to serve on their faculty. They have all this free money that they don't know what to do. They're not going to spend it on students, but they are going to give you nice kickbacks if you were a politician that supported them along the way.
Right.
And Jason, the Penn story gets even better. Do you know what they found in Biden's office at Penn University?
Don't tell me classified documents.
The classified documents.
Oh my gosh. Whoa, Todd.
What are the odds?
Todd. Hang on. So let me get this straight. After Joe Biden puts out legislation with Barack Obama that allows institutions to charge ridiculous rates, and he gets, so they're getting rich off it. He leaves. He goes to be a professor that doesn't have to teach a class for $1 million. Ironically enough, the Chinese Communist Party gives the Penn Biden sent, or gives the University of Pennsylvania $50 million, much of which that goes to establish the Biden Penn Center, and he's collecting $1 million, and he stores classified documents there. Todd,
all of that information's stored at the university where the Chinese have a heavy investment. I don't know. Maybe there's nothing else to it, Jason. Maybe that's just purely a coincidence, and maybe no one ever looked at the documents because they were locked up securely.
Oh, right. You know, because I know a lot of office buildings that have highly secure standards. I mean, President Trump is being charged right now for document handling at Mar-a-Lago, where there's armed security and security cameras and all sorts of stuff. But the Biden Penn Center, like, that's a standard office building. They got a security guard at the desk. You
would think so. It's certainly more secure than your garage and Corvette. I will give him that.
Don't tell me Joe Biden had documents in his garage and Corvette, Todd.
I think Hunter Biden had access to them too, Jason.
No, Todd, you are such a conspiracy theorist. Why do you do this to me, Todd?
Can't believe we would say that. I mean, that's public fact, but I don't know what you're getting at, Jason. I'm just saying that Hunter Biden had access to Joe Biden's classified documents in his garage, and that he had documents stored at the University of Pennsylvania where the Chinese had a heavy investment. If you're going to connect dots, then that's on you.
Yeah, well, and Todd, next thing you know, you're going to tell me that, well, luckily Joe Biden is facing criminal charges like President Trump, though, right? Like, didn't he get accused of like 72 felonies for doing that?
I think he has 91 indictments on 5 criminal charges in 4 criminal cases.
Okay, yeah, because we don't have a 2-tier justice system, and so clearly they would treat both the ex-vice president, current president, and the former president the same for document handling.
Yeah, and Donald Trump didn't have a constitutional authority of the classified documents. That would be the vice president of the United States, if I understand that correctly. So no, it's all in the up and up.
Oh, geez, yeah. Thank goodness there's no conspiracy there as we dovetail into that. Let's get back to student loans.
Let's do student loans here. Let's we haven't talked about Obama yet. So Joe Biden, vice president under Barack Obama, gets to go to Penn afterwards, gets to store his documents here. But when we talk about student loan prices, Barack Obama's name cannot be unmentioned in this entire story here. So let's pull up just a little bit. Do you remember when Obama promised that everything would be free, Jason?
Yes.
Free, lower cost. It just makes sense. Government knows how to run efficiently. This is interesting then. College prices increased faster than previously, and today the average undergraduate is now leaving school with $35,000 in debt, up from $17,000 when Obama announced. This was written in 2015, and Obama made his sweeping changes to higher ed pricing and loans and all that nonsense in 2010. So in 5 years, Barack Obama doubled your student debt. Congratulations, borrowers.
Right. And I'm sure the quality of the education's really gone up. We probably have a glut of nuclear physicists. We probably have physicians falling off trees. We probably have all sorts of folks that have earned these degrees that are really going to benefit society. Right, Todd?
Absolutely. When you double your debt, I imagine that we're doubling the productive output from that debt that was accrued. I mean, it just makes sense to me.
Well, yeah. And if you go back to that plumber that we were talking about who's trying to get a loan for his business, when he goes in and says, you know, I want to qualify for twice the amount of financing, the bank's going to come back at him and say, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Plumber, how are you going to generate twice the revenue now? Like, how's this going to be a worthwhile investment? They're going to do that with those educational things, aren't they, Todd?
You would think so, but that's not the case. I would think we could safely say that the value of college education has gone down, the quality of higher education has gone down, and yet, in those 5 short years, I can only imagine what it's at now. The price of college, and as our chart showed, is off the chains. Right. So we have an inverse relationship between what you are paying, what you are getting, and certainly what you and I as a taxpayer are getting out of this. I don't see society improving. If we wanted to make the argument that this is for the betterment of society, like our mutual friend that you mentioned earlier is making the case for, I'm not seeing it out there.
You know, it's funny you say that. I was on my Twitter feed this morning and I was looking at the government debt because now the government's talking about financing. And so this year we're going to collect $4.7 trillion in total government taxes. Do yourself a favor, folks, if you're watching the show, try to write out $4.7 trillion. See if you can guess how many zeros it is. And on top of that, we're about to crest $33 trillion in debt. And I got to say, if you're spending $4 trillion a year and you've got a $33 trillion credit card bill, the streets of America should be paved in gold. Like, we should be living in Jetson world where there should be no homeless. There should be you should be living in glamour for the government to take that much money. And if you're spending these trillions of dollars in these student loan programs, you should have the most educated, sophisticated. You should have people out there like solving nuclear fusion. Instead, you have gender studies majors who are working at Starbucks complaining that nobody's going to pay for their student loans. Totally ridiculous.
As Thomas Sowell says, we've reached the point where if it's your fault, it's suddenly society's fault. Yep, here we are again, right? It gets really interesting, Jason, as we talk through cost. I Again, I think we just need to put this up there and we need to say it so people understand. And again, go look for yourself too. This is Jason and I pulling some information before the show. We like to think we're outside of mainstream media, but that doesn't mean you take our word for it naturally here. But when we talk about government involvement in the student loan game specifically, there was a 2015 study, and this is from the Washington Examiner if you want to look that up too. The pass-through effect of subsidized federal loans on tuition raised rates by 60 cents for every dollar of loans spent. I think that's it right there. That's the smoking gun. When you talk about why college is so expensive, it's because your government got involved.
Yeah, and as an aside too, name one thing that the government's involvement has ever improved in America. Go to the DMV, you wait for 2 hours to maybe get your license renewed. If you look at, since we got involved in the charity business, we have more homeless and we have a worse situation than we ever had. Student loans, what we got in with the best of intentions, and then the politicians thought, well, how are we going to monetize this? And both the Democrats and Republicans did it. So now you end up with this bubble of financial debt.
Yeah, and that's a much larger conversation. But like you said, when government's in there, how is anything better? Public education, K-12, higher education at colleges, right? DMV, post office. I mean, the post office didn't have its overnight or 2-day delivery until Amazon and UPS and FedEx started competing in the marketplace for consumers. All of this goes back to get government out of there. But I think we've crossed the line. At this point, I'm fine just setting up our own private colleges. There's places like Hillsdale. There's other private colleges. If you want to go get a traditional conservative American education that might focus on language, Latin, Greek, history, real history, I think it's dead at the public university system. I just don't see how you salvage any of that at this point.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Todd used to work in the education system. And one of the things we're going to explore in our Substack, which is theamericantribune.net, is we're going to start digging into some of the awful things that are going on in the education system. I had just shared from a local group. I'm from Minnesota, and Anoka Hennepin School District. And I was in a group, and I had shared this with my with my compatriots. But students in the school district in the area I live, which is a fairly red part of Minnesota, a little north of the Twin Cities. However you identify at school, they don't notify the parents. I don't even know how that's legal. Something can be going on with my kid like that, and you don't even tell me. It's ridiculous. But we've got to watch what we say, because some of these platforms don't like us talking about stuff like that.
Yeah, but people, Minnesota nice. It's more Minnesota naive. People think, oh, this doesn't happen here. Maybe in California, where the Democrats are really in charge. Well, newsflash, Democrats in Minnesota have the trifecta. They control the House, the Senate, and the governor's office right now. And they can get away with a lot of really crazy things. But I would challenge anyone that lives in, let's say, a first or second ring suburb, predominantly, let's say, upper middle class community. You think, well, that wouldn't happen in my school. That happens in those other schools that aren't as good. But I moved to this expensive suburb because I wanted to get my kids a good education. I would invite you to go to a school board meeting. I would invite you to go to your school district's website and look up some of the board minutes. It is. I have bad news for you. It's happening in your school. You might live in the reddest community in your state, in your city, but your public education system does not reflect your values in the least. And so Jason alluded to Anoka Hennepin, a larger school district in Minnesota. I think the largest school district in Minnesota. It could be big, it could be small, but the colleges that we talk about pushing through their communists, if you have a teacher in your school, they had to go to a 4-year college. They got the same instruction from the same type of professor. They don't share your values anymore. And certainly the people running on school board, because in Minnesota, at least, you cannot affiliate with a party. People don't know who they're voting for on school boards. And right. I know this is getting us off the student loan conversation a little bit, but I mean, it starts a lot younger than just higher ed. The problem is all government involvement in education. And Jason, I got one more comment, then I'll throw it back to you here. But you and I were talking before the show about public funding and education. In Minnesota, over 50% of our tax dollars go to the K-12 education system. We pay 10% almost on state income taxes here, but they are infiltrating and infecting everything they touch when it comes to education. And we talk about more government involvement, more money. I'm not seeing anything coming out of that.
No, if you look at, and back to the concept that we talked about when we were talking to our friend Bjorn, nothing's free. And if we as a society are going to take on that debt, we should be getting payback on that debt, or we shouldn't be on that debt. it's just so obvious. It boggles the mind, shall you say.
Yeah, and I unfortunately can't put up a comment from Keith. Thanks for listening and following along with the conversation and engaging with the conversation. But he's absolutely right. It's been going on for a very long time. And Keith, our message here on Freedom from the Press is really just to get information out to a wider audience, too. Yeah, Jason and I are well versed in what's going on here. I've certainly been inside the belly of the beast for my entire adult career. But it's information that needs to get out. And most people, Jason and I stress this every show, and I'll stress it again here. Most people just want to focus on their family, focus on their career, live in a good community, and take care of themselves and the people around them. But what gets lost in that process is you don't have time to dig into the details of what's really going on.
Oh my gosh, Keith, are you blank heads out there elect these blank holes and wonder why the country is being topped? Keith, you are 100% correct. And go back and check out segment 1 before we had the Wi-Fi issue. Here's the thing we got to realize, folks. This isn't a Democrat-Republican issue. Like the woke stuff is coming from the Democrats right now. This was a problem created by our ruling class. Our establishment Republicans, our establishment Democrats, both created this student loan crisis. Now, if you look, you want to do another test, throw something up on your social media saying, hey, who should pay for student loans? All the conversation is about pay your own loans or always to have the government pay my loans because I can't. None of the conversation is how do we go back and claw back the billions of dollars from these learning institutions and from these financial institutions who took advantage of citizens. So think about that for a second. That's what we're really trying to drive home in our Freedom from the Press podcast. They have us on the right, because Todd and I are right-leaning. They have us arguing that you should pay for your own loans. Our neighbor on the left, the guy down the street who voted for Joe Biden, who you probably get along with fine, he's arguing that, oh, that's inhumane. We should forgive the loans. Neither one of us are talking about why don't we hold the people who screwed the students and screwed the financing, why don't we hold them accountable and get the money back from them? Because if we just let the government separate us and all our argument is you pay your own loans or they pay their loans, the criminals get away with it. And when do we pass legislation that stops this from happening? Because all this student loan talk should be associated with, you know what? We need to have schools rein in their costs and we need to make less financing available. Because even if we paid off every student loan today, 5 years from now, it's still happening and getting worse. 10 years from now, it's still happening and getting worse. And guys like Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren just got hired to teach a law class at Harvard for millions of dollars. She's taught 0 classes. And if you dive into how many politicians get paid to go talk at schools, get paid to be on their board, get paid when they leave office to go work for these organizations, it would boggle your mind. And that's because that's the deal they make. Hey, we're going to go pass these favorable regulations for you. And then you can, when I get out, I'll come work for you. It's ridiculous.
And Jason, I'm so glad you said that. So our friends on the left, and we encourage everyone of every political persuasion to follow along here, get some information, start thinking differently about things other than what's presented in the news. Even if we accepted the premise that all student loans could be repaid and we start fresh, like you said, that's not solving the problem. We're going to be in the same predicament 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. You go back to Reagan when he issued amnesty to all of the illegal immigrants in the country. It didn't solve the problem. I mean, it might have put a temporary solution for a day on the larger issue, but then here we are again, right? We've got Joe Biden's open borders. We're dealing with the same crisis at magnitude now. If you want to just simply say, let's forgive loans and start fresh, you have to understand without modifying the system or rectifying the underlying issues, it doesn't actually solve anything. It might make you feel good because you're not paying $400 a month. And by all means, good for you. Do something worthy with that $400. I suspect you would go out and buy a larger car, larger house, larger TV. Like your life wouldn't actually improve outside of material goods. You wouldn't do anything different in your own life other than spend someone else's money for a little bit. But at the end of the day, politicians are still going to get kickbacks. Higher ed is still going to get more expensive. You haven't actually done anything. So I would challenge you to think about that if you think that's the way forward.
Right. And, that's kind of the theme that we're going to go about on our podcast is as we talk about a lot of this stuff. We talked about Social Security. We talked about how the military industrial, we talked about Alexander Vindman, how he went and we laid it out, how he supported all these programs. Now he works for Ukraine. getting money from that. And folks have to realize our political establishment is corrupt. Right, left, doesn't matter. Just because we happen to be Trump voters and conservatives doesn't excuse Mitch McConnell, who passes these stupid laws that don't help the average American citizen. The Bush dynasty, if you go back and look what they passed all kinds of destructive things for this country. And until us as Trump voters can look at our neighbor down the street, across the road, who's a Biden voter, and say, you know what, you and I have more in common, and we can't let it be where they fight against each other. Student loan should be a good one. Let's all agree that we go after the criminals in the finance agencies, and we go after the criminals in these educational institutions. Let's hold them accountable if somebody's going to pay the student loan bill.
Absolutely. And Jason, you and I support Trump not because we're registered Republicans. We support Donald Trump and candidates like him because they're pushing a message of smaller government and more freedom for individuals right now. It's as simple as that. And unfortunately, like you said, left and right, like, oh, you support Trump, you support Joe Biden, we must be against each other. No. My values when it comes to government dictate that he's the man that needs my support right now because he's the one making these promises right now. He's the one that's acted on that. We had 4 years of a Trump presidency where we saw deregulation. So we need more of that.
Absolutely.
All right,
Todd, how do we bring it home?
Let's bring it home. Well, really fast here. I know you and I didn't want to talk left, right, but I think, again, stressing what Barack Obama did to the student loan game here as we kind of wrap up our history, and then we can wrap up maybe with what Joe Biden's doing right now here. But just to see where those changes really came to play, and I think really where we're at today is because of the 2010 legislation that Obama passed, which got the Department of Education as the only place to go for student loans. And again, we talked about how the government partners with these larger financial institutions like Sallie Mae, who issue the loans, manage the loans, but the Department of Ed is really overseeing all of this, much like your analogy of the Fed with our monetary policy here. But again, Obama gets the government more directly involved, makes the Department of Ed the head of all of this, and then, as we saw, the prices were skyrocketing here. Student loan rates changed drastically once the Department of Ed got involved because, again, the government's out to make money off of the taxpayer. They're going to get it one way or the other. They're going to get it by charging higher interest rates to students, and then they're going to get that back when they forgive loans and then just tax us more to offset those costs there.
Excellent.
All right, Jason.
This chart is amazing.
Here we go. So we'll wrap up on this one today here. So Supreme Court in June, Jason, quick recap, shot down Biden's first student loan forgiveness plan as many states contested that and said, you can't do this. So Joe Biden, what does he do? He goes around through his now Department of Education. And just as an aside, Vivek Ramaswamy, I haven't heard anyone else say it, but he said he would abolish the Department of Education federal level. We absolutely need that rhetoric and we need that action from someone that's going to come into the White House and shake things up here. Joe Biden's latest thing is called SAVE. So SAVE here. And talking about, I talk about my wife's option to do income-based repayments here. So that's what this breaks down to essentially. It's a really high bar if you don't want to pay any student loans here. So if you're listening on audio, iTunes, Spotify here, and you don't have this chart available here, basically $60,000 is the cutoff here. If you are a family of four making $60,000 or less, you don't pay any more student loans on a monthly basis here. They're going to just squash that right now. As you get down to 50, 40, 30, again, depending on family size here, for the most part, if you're under $60,000 or $50,000, you wouldn't have to make any more monthly repayments on your loans.
And here's what's remarkable about it too. And I don't want to be critical of anybody's life choices, but if you're going to go take out student loans to further your education and you can't find a way to go monetize that to make at least $60,000, you probably shouldn't be in college. If you went to learn to be a journeyman welder, my stepson, he was terrible at school. He was a truant. He struggled. He got out and he got a job doing welding at a manufacturer, and hard, physical, difficult work. They sent him to get further education that they paid for, because it turned out like when he had to work and had his own bills to pay, ironically, he became a little more responsible. And then and he makes more than this just a year or two into the industry. So for any of these folks that think like, hey, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to run up student loan debts, and I'm not going to be able to make $60,000 a year, you're doing it wrong. You've picked the wrong thing to go into.
Yeah. And Jason, I'm a millennial here. I'm probably on the older side of millennial as it goes, but my generation grew up just being told over and over again from family, community, schools, you have to go to college. The only way to succeed is if you go to college. Now that message is starting to change, but I still hear, when I was working in the K-12 system, too many families of high schoolers saying, you got to go to college. You need to go to college. They look down upon the vocational trades. They look down upon welding and plumbing and HVAC. You're too smart for that. You're too good for that. You can go to college and do something else here. Again, I would just encourage people to really look at options when they have a student that's of age that they might start looking at colleges and really start to think, why? Is it worth investing in this money? Is it worth getting the education that they're going to get? And I say education loosely because it's more along the lines of indoctrination at this point. There's no thinking involved. You're not allowed to contest what your professors say. But the conversation is starting to shift, but it really needs to shift. I'm not saving for my kids' education. I got 2 little ones right now. We're not doing a 529. If they do go the route of college, if they want to follow mom's footsteps and do that path, I mean, good for them, and we'll support that. But as of right now, I'm going to say there are other options out there other than college. And Jason, you and I are a great example. We have our own business now, right? We didn't need to go to college to run our own business. There's so many options out there that young people aren't exposed to. But I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I think one of the big problems that you'll see in all of this is that people never connect the dots to what you're doing and how it's going to benefit society. Why does society want to pay for further education? Because we expect you to do something for the benefit of society. Sounds cold, sounds heartless, but that's reality. Society is not going to pay you to go do something because you want to. How are you going to contribute? Are you going to build a house? Are you going to grow food? Are you going to provide services that people need? And here's the thing is, if you're in school and what you're doing people aren't going to pay you to do, you should do something else. It's kind of the same discussion we have with minimum wage. If like California just set minimum wage at $20 an hour in some localities, and I'm sorry, if you're making minimum wage, do something else. That's the beauty of America. Todd and I left corporate America. I got into conservative digital marketing stuff. We had the opportunity to start our own business. Nobody taught me that. There was no college class I could go to for that. I couldn't go take out a big loan for $200,000 to start my business. We had to bootstrap it and we had to build it. And that's the beauty of America.
Yeah, and Jason, we walked away from really comfortable W-2 positions. Like, we could have ridden it out in corporate America, provided for families, but you and I wanted a little bit more. And I mean, if you are willing to take the leap, the opportunities are out there.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of which, Todd, we should probably share with these folks different ways where you can support our work. If you like what we do and you want to find a way to support us, how can they do that, Todd?
Yeah, they have a couple options here. So you can certainly look up the podcast. You can like and support and subscribe to our Facebook pages. We've got tons of them out there. If you're watching on Facebook right now, that's one of our Facebook pages. There are many more. You can read our work at theamericantribune.com. That's where we cover more political and entertainment news, a little easier to digest. But we're also on Substack, and that's where we can get into the nitty gritty. We cover Epstein a lot. We're going to do some exposés on the public education system. So that's at americantribune.news. And you can be a paid subscriber over there if you like what you read as well. So we've kind of built out a library. We do some individual exposés. We've covered McConnell, Alexander Vindman, the villain from the 2019 impeachment scandal. So we're starting to build out on that. And if you have any suggestions, leave a comment on our Facebook page. But we'd be thrilled to get your support. And we appreciate everyone listening again this week.
Awesome. Well, hey, folks, going to be a lot of exciting news this weekend. Make sure you pay attention. With Hunter Biden just got indicted. Joe Biden, the tide is turning. And we should do an episode on this. Who's going to end up being the Democrat nominee? Because now in the last 48 hours, you've seen CNN actually calling out the Joe Biden lies, which is the most comical thing ever. We'll have to find the video. It's on my Twitter. I had retweeted it from Colin Rugg, but they went through all these lies Joe Biden's told for years. Like, I was at 9/11 and I was at this. And it's like, okay, dude, he's been in Congress for about 100 years and he's been telling these same lies for 100 years and you're just finally talking about it. So the shift is happening on the left. They're going to throw Joy Boy from the bus. I'm just fascinated to see how they get rid of Kamala, because Todd, there's no way they can run Kamala, is there?
How do you get rid of a black woman, right? The first black female vice president. So that'll be interesting to watch for sure. That would be a fun show.
Yeah, and how do you replace her? It looks like the leading candidate is Gavin Newsom, so a heterosexual white male. So you throw Kamala from the bus and you bring in Gavin Newsom. Like, oh, I want to see
The
how that-
patriarchy always wins. Yeah, we might have to explore that last week. Leave a comment if you want Jason and I to kind of go through that next Friday's episode.
Sounds great, folks. Thanks for tuning in. We're gonna get out of here, and especially thanks for folks who put up with us as we had the Wi-Fi go down. So thanks a lot, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend.